But going to our main topic. So, combat mission, Shock Force 2. We interviewed a developer, I think a couple of days ago, Stephen Grammett, I believe. And we had an incredible interview, incredible podcast. A lot of really great details and news came out, a couple of cool shockers. So I've been playing a bit of Combat Mission 2, and I would have to say I played only one scenario so far. It took like maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours. And the one thing I really take away from Combat Mission is every time I play it, I realize like how incredible a game this is, how incredible of a tactical simulation this is. I'm assuming Tortuga might have an opposing viewpoint. All right, I'm curious why. So, what's your retort?
No, I think it's a very good game.
Okay.
Well, I would say it's a good game. A lot of the things that impressed me about Combat Mission Shock Force, I guess it's just about the Combat Mission series in general, is it's one of the games that like really makes me feel I'm looking at how soldiers might really act.
Yeah.
And I want to just give one example, which is actually from Combat Mission Red Thunder, but something which really has stuck with me. Like I when I think about this game, I think about this exact scene because it was just so cool. I was playing one of the scenarios where I was playing as I don't know even who generated this scenario, if it was generated by the company, somebody else, who knows. But the mission was just to take a German patrol in the middle of the night out to secure some objective. It was a very small map. I only had to deal with, I had like 4 squads of people. And we patrolled over to like look at some barn, some crossing point. But the really cool thing is, if you're just issuing a movement order, your troops are walking just like they would walk like in a combat zone, but when they're not in combat. You know, their guns are down, they're just moving slowly. I mean, they're walking. They're not like running, because on a patrol you're not going to run if you're not in combat. I mean, it's not like you're storming the beach or something. You're on a combat patrol. You're walking. Your eyes are up. You're looking around. It's just so immersive on that little detail. And I really felt like it just immersed me immediately into this scenario. I was like, okay. And it made me want to play even more immersive. I chose not to run my men to a specific place because in the back of my head, Min-Max Tortuga was thinking, oh, the time's working against me. I should run them. But no, I gave in to the role-playing aspect of it. And I was like, no, let's just walk them like they're on a patrol. Let's move them over here. And anyways, it was just really immersive. And I think that's something which, one way in which Combat Mission has won my heart. The actual combat is, it's a little bit slow for me. I mean,
really?
Yeah. I mean, look at that one little map with like 4 squads taking it. That was like an hour-long mission, and I didn't pause that often. But it still took a long time to finish. So I think that for anybody who wants to pause, if you're playing, I was playing in the real-time strategy mode, and maybe it goes faster if you play in the turn-based mode. But I'm just breezing through gameplay mechanics. You guys are going to have to come back and we'll talk about them. Anyways, that's my first impression, and it was very positive.
I did want to address one thing that you just said, and I think is absolutely spot on. So I've been playing mostly Shock Force 2, which is, I think, primarily our topic. Well, Combat Mission is our topic, but Shock Force 2 is the game that's well, probably by the time you listen to this, is going to be on Steam. It's supposed to come out on the 1st of September. And so they're bringing the entire catalog to Steam eventually, but the first one that's going to come to Steam is Shock Force 2. And Shock Force 2 is a hypothetical conflict in the year 2007. The game was originally made in 2007, so this is really like a remaster and upgrade of Shock Force 1, of a hypothetical U.S. NATO-led invasion of Syria. It assumes Iraq occurred because the Americans are invading from Iraq, but then it also assumes like the NATO forces are coming down south from Turkey. The Marines are landing on the beaches of Syria from the Mediterranean. By the way, I want to know, like maybe it's in the game somewhere, I want to know how the hell the U.S. 4 years after Iraq convinced NATO to invade a Middle East country like Syria when NATO was definitely not on board with the U.S. invading Syria or invading Iraq. Like, what did Syria do? But anyway, but one thing that I think you really hit the nail on the head with Tortuga is like getting I think anyway the experience right of like what would soldiers be doing. And I'll use one example because obviously not a soldier, so I could be completely wrong. I'm speaking somewhat of ignorance. But having talked to, one of my best friends who's a Marine and sort of having him talk about, what it was really like for him anyway in Afghanistan. And then also having, occasionally stumbling upon videos on like YouTube where it's like so-and-so calls in an airstrike or whatever. And you when you see some of that footage, it's like, when I'm playing Shock Force 2, it feels like it gets that right. Like a lot of that footage is literally just guys like sitting under cover as an FAO's like calling in an airstrike on a building, and occasionally you hear like a pot shot or something like that from the guys that are shooting at them that they're calling in the strike on, and but it's just guys sitting and waiting, and like that's my experience. It feels weird to say that. So like I think to your point of it being slow, Tortuga, I think it gets that right. I think, but like, so the mission I just played was the second mission in the German campaign, and basically your objective is to identify enemy bases or enemy squads and buildings, and then call in artillery or airstrikes on those buildings and knock them out. You really are not. You shouldn't be storming those buildings. You should be doing everything you can to just identify where they are and take them out with artillery and air. And that's the most efficient way. So I tried the more aggressive route, and I took like 20 or 30 casualties. Like each time I tried it, I failed once, I succeeded once, I drew once, and it was like, could you imagine just a random town in Syria, Germany moving in and taking 20 KIA and like 20 wounded? Like that would be a catastrophe in a modern war. But when I stood back and used my artillery basically very precisely to just take out these strong points and then mop up with like chain guns on my armored vehicles and tank rounds from a distance, I took one. The last time I played that mission, I took 1 killed, 4 wounded, and that felt much more like what you read about or what you see as a civilian anyway, as much as you can see without like really going into the places that I really don't want to watch, like tons of real war online. But like that felt authentic in a way that like you read or you see about in terms of what the conflicts in Iraq or Afghanistan for the most part look like, right? Like obviously you get an ambush, it's very different, but that can happen in the game too. And so when thinking about how I'm playing that and experiencing that, it seems to get it right. Or, using your armor to rapidly cover open ground and then having troops pile out the back of a AFV and storm into buildings and sort of systematically clearing through a town, building by building, because if you miss one, the enemy might be hiding, or there might be an IED guy who's just waiting to explode. By the way, there are asymmetrical warfare aspects of this. So there are guys who look like civilians. There's not really civilians in the game, but there are guys whose characters are dressed like civilians, and if you drive over an IED and that character's still alive, they'll detonate that IED and it'll destroy a half-track or something like that. So like, again, I think, we didn't really talk to Steven about this, but I think Shock Force 2 probably originated somewhat out of, we want to do a modern war game that's about Afghanistan and Iraq, but we don't want to make it about Afghanistan and Iraq while people are fighting and dying there, because that's pretty damn tacky. Like, that would be my guess of where the impetus of Syria came, was we want to do a modern war game, and we don't want to make it too this is what's happening right now, but like, let's be real, these are the topics that are all front of mind in 2007.
Yeah, so I mean, the interesting thing about it is the reason why I think they did that with Syria, not Iraq, was, I don't know if you guys remember at the time, but there was like it was a big thing, and it was even in the military community. People thought this was kind of not cool. There was a game. It was supposed to be a first-person shooter that was supposed to recreate the Battle of Fallujah. And it was, I remember it was on the news too, even, where they were discussing the moral implications. Should you make a game like this during wartime, only months or a year after actual Battle of Fallujah happened, where you actually have, this is not Vietnam. This is something that just recently happened. So I feel like they chose Syria to kind of get that Iraq war feeling, but not actually do the Iraq war feeling, not to actually cover the Iraq war.
Well, and in our interview with Steve, he also talked about like they were, from the beginning of Combat Mission, they were always very interested in trying to get a government contract and do some professional work. And I have you make all of their games to that point had been World War II, which is fine. But if you're talking about trying to get a government contract in 2007, it probably makes sense that you show the military you can simulate what they're fighting right now, right?
But going to, I wanted to kind of answer Tortuga's thing because you mentioned that, like military combat, there was not much of it in your scenario that you played for the World War II one. I played two scenarios altogether, and in both scenarios, there was a heavy amount of firing. The first one was where a convoy was ambushed and I forgot the name of those vehicles. Not Humvees, but the ones that replaced the Humvees. I never actually was in the new ones that they put out, but
talking about like an MRAP, which was sort of like a stopgap.
Probably an MRAP.
Yeah. So I believe it was that. But yeah, so there was a bunch of them that had an ambush, they were immobilized, and you had about like 2 or 3 squads that were kind of stuck in the middle, and the whole town just lit up. Like this entire section of the city, like nearly every building had insurgents that were firing on from every angle, and you had a relief convoy. I forgot the name that we use, that the military uses. I forgot the name of it. QRF, that's it. I'm sorry. My memory sucks. But QRF shows up and, you have to fight your way out. That was really, really like edge of your seat action. And then I had another one, which I thought was going to be kind of like more calming. I had 2 platoons. I was supposed to go into the middle of a town. It was like sunrise. And I figured nothing really, like I might run into maybe, 2 squads of insurgents. No, there was a lot of them, and there was just so much heavy firing to the point where I had to monitor my troops' ammo count. And that's one thing I love about this game is like you can't just have your soldiers keep firing on a building and hopefully you hit one of them. No, you only have a certain amount of ammo, and if your soldiers run out, as far as I know, there's no way to resupply them. So you gotta be tactful. You have to tell them, all right, listen, you just killed out a quarter of your ammo. Cease fire and just stand by. So
I thought that was interesting too, because when we interviewed Steve, he was talking about like one of the things that really surprised the military. They recently signed a contract with the military for Combat Mission. And one of the things that really surprised their planners apparently was like it tracks every single round, everything that's been fired, everything that's been used, and they can output that. So the ability to show them like in how in a realistic combat scenario, just how many sheer tons of ammunition and equipment can get expended in a very short period of time. Most of the conflicts or most of the engagements that we end up in right now anyway are so isolated or so, it might be a hot engagement, but it's not like we're fighting a high intensity war. So I wonder how much like military planners really think about like the need of how much ammo you need to have ready or available or the logistics behind that. And, Combat Mission kind of helped anyway in their example of sort of sharing that information with them and saying, look, listen, a 45-minute firefight, that uses way more ammunition than you guys are thinking. And, using something like this to show that. And I think that's really cool. But yeah, that's a good point. Like you really have to manage your ammunition and your resources carefully. I think one of the things I enjoy about the campaigns in the game is the Shock Force 2 has like linked campaigns of scenarios, and the scenarios are kind of predefined. The mission is predefined, the enemy is predefined. But what is a little bit dynamic is your casualties carry over from mission to mission. So depending on the campaign and how many times that unit reoccurs in the campaign, if you get yourself just completely beat up in the early scenarios, you're going to be too weak to win the later scenarios, and that feels about right, because certainly in an invasion of Syria scenario, this isn't World War II where you're cycling in replacements over years of combat. This is probably a week or 2 week long blitzkrieg style offensive across the desert. You lose a tank, maybe you can repair it, with the logistics you have back there. You lose a soldier though. There's no one like training back in the U.S. waiting to redeploy as replacements. Maybe very minimal, but like if a unit loses men, the initial attack anyway, before the inevitable insurgency, the initial attack is not going to have replacements cycling in and out during that campaign. And so I think that's one of the other things that's very well done, is it kind of forces you to think, I think, the way that a lot of commanders probably have to think, because you have to manage those resources and you have to manage those people, because you don't have infinite of either.